Hello and welcome to Ratio Christi Television. What is the bondage of the mind? Understanding thought slavery is what we're going to be talking about today in this episode. Ratio Christi is a campus apologetics alliance. That means that we set up Christian apologetics clubs on university, college, community college, and high school campuses throughout the United States and internationally as well. Through apologetics, we're able to address the tough questions that people have about Christianity, different man-made religions out there, and also relevant world issues. The purpose of our organization is to help make people aware of the evidence for the Christian worldview and to point people to truth with a capital T, which is why we call our program Truth Matters. Joining me is Anna Kitko. Anna was made providentially aware of her calling into Christian apologetics in high school, having been caught up in ministering to local destructive cult groups. She has fully embraced this calling and now has 3 university degrees in the field. Anna adores enriching and growing the church through the teaching and equipping of others to be able to better understand and articulate their faith, and making people feel comfortable discussing uncomfortable topics, because those can be the most important conversations one could have. She's been here a number of times on Truth Matters before, so it's great to have her back once again. Anna, welcome back to Truth Matters.
It's always a pleasure to be on.
It's great to have you back. We always have different topics every single week, and this one here is a timely topic, more timely than people are aware of. And we're talking about slavery in general, but usually when people think about that topic, they're thinking about back like European slavery, where there were blacks who were slaves and slaves of the white or European slave masters, quote unquote, which is historically inaccurate to a high degree when you look at the other slavery that was going on at that same time. But what we're talking about today is a different angle, because we're talking about mental slavery, which some people are aware of. Other people say, hey, how could that even be possible? Can someone's mind really become enslaved?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I think thought slavery is the #1 bondage that's overlooked, especially in our country and in our culture. So the answer, of course, is yes. Yes, people can completely be enslaved for their mental capacity and as well as their behavior and emotional capacity. Most everyone has personal experience with an individual who has changed for them, maybe a friend or a loved one that just suddenly one day they just weren't acting the same anymore, or you lost them to a group where you just kind of, they stopped contacting you, or you couldn't get in contact with them and you wondered what would happen to them. Major cult groups in our nation, like the Scientologists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, these groups practice these tactics to enslave people and to use them to manipulate their financials, their intellectual capacity, and just to control them in general in order to advance their group. Some people are more familiar with a lot of the more damaging, destructive groups that came out of the 70s and the 80s, like as far as Charles Manson, for example, with Helter Skelter, or Heaven's Gate, or even Jim Jones. And it's our job as cult apologists to really make the world aware of the fact that these groups are out there, they are destructive, and they are practicing these tactics of actually enslaving individuals.
And it's definitely important for us to define our terms. That term cult has a negative connotation attached to it, especially when you use that term when describing such a large group of people such as Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. And many people take that negatively, like, hey, they think about like Jim Jones, they think about Helter Skelter type. They think of cult being a small group of people who are weird or in some way or whatever. But many, we as Christians use that term as well when describing anyone who claims to be a Christian, which has deferred from Orthodox Christianity at some point, even if they may agree on certain doctrines to a particular degree. of course, they're using different dictionaries, even though they use the same terms. And when we talk about Christian cult, quote unquote, or just a theological cult, that is a huge distinction there between that and a social cult per se. Now, what you're talking about here, is there a difference between that and actual brainwashing?
Yes, what we're discussing tonight is something called coercive persuasion. In a way, it's a lot scarier than brainwashing. In that brainwashing classically is when you are aware of who your enemy is, and usually there's torture involved, physical torture, in order to get an individual to acknowledge or say something or put something in writing that the torturer wants them to do, just to control them in general. But in brainwashing cases, your enemy is known. In coercive
Hmm.
persuasion, this is when an individual doesn't know that they're being controlled. This is when they're not aware of the fact that the leader that they're following or the guru that they are studying under is actually out to manipulate them for their own personal gain. And in fact, in these cases, and like you pointed out very aptly, the difference in how we define cult groups, these would be destructive cults. So a cult, of course, is someone, a group that is a spin-off of something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be destructive. But in the cases that we're talking about tonight, especially with mental slavery and coercive persuasion, these are destructive groups, groups that are only really interested in controlling and manipulating and withholding information and changing the lives of their adherents towards the negative.
And this is very important information for people to have, especially, Anna, you and I know that many Mormons out there are probably the best neighbors you could have, probably. And many people have Mormon neighbors, coworkers, friends, etc. And the term cult, they're like, whoa, whoa, that's like the furthest thing from them. And we need to make that distinction so that people realize, hey, they claim to be Christians. Actually, they claim to be the true Christians, and that we, as evangelical Christians who follow just the Bible itself, not the Book of Mormon and all the other books that come along with Mormonism, that we are the ones who are deceived by Satan and all of that. So, um, that's what we need to say. Okay, theological cult means this. It's completely different than social cult. And although they're some of the nicest people out there, the best neighbors in the world, there is still technically a degree of mind control that's going on, and it's so important. And I really appreciate you making that distinction between mind control and brainwashing, because I'm sure a lot of people don't know the difference between the two. But can you give some examples of characteristics that are common in cases of mind control?
We use a determiner called the BITE method. The B stands for behavior, I stands for information, then thinking, and then emotion. And so what we'd like to track with groups is just how much control they have over those four areas of someone's life. A destructive cult will usually have a very tight control over all four of these aspects. You're looking for people that their behavior has been altered, or the group teaches an extremely tight code of conduct. And we're not talking like normal morality, we're talking highly, highly specific behavioral content, like how to dress, how much time you spend with others. In the case, for example, with the Mormons that we've been talking about so far, on a theological level, they will actually send out their missionaries on their 2-year mission. And for them, their time is extremely, extremely controlled. So that the missionaries don't actually have time to themselves. They always are with their partner. That's an extreme control over time and behavior. As far as information is concerned, think about the Jehovah's Witnesses who can only go to jw.org or are told to only go to jw.org for their information. They're not allowed to go out and explore other websites or seek any type of criticism of their group. Remember, if a group claims to have the truth, they should stand up to some level of scrutiny. So when you have a group that says, no, you cannot criticize us, or you cannot look at what the criticisms of our group are like, you're probably in a destructive cult group. Then, of course, thinking and emotions. Anytime that they have a guru or an authoritative structure has any type of say about how you are to go about thinking or how you are to emote that usually is a characterization that is seen as negative, or a characterization of a destructive cult group. Young people are usually the people that are gone after the most with these groups because they've been taken away from their family unit. They're vulnerable for the first time. They're young, they're haughty, they want to know what else is out there. They want to hear that their parents didn't know what they were talking about. So college students are usually a number one target, as well as groups that utilize illicit drug use. That's very common amongst these groups because they require a state of mental vulnerability before they can start suggesting to you what you need to do to change and what you need to do to adapt to your new group. So you want to watch out for that as well.
And another flavor to bring into this, because people commonly think of Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. There's another group that a lot of people don't know about, and this is again from the Islamic perspective. There's actually a group known as the Gulen movement, that Gulen. Fethullah Gulen's from Turkey, and he actually has a number of charter schools throughout the United States, although he's based in Pennsylvania. But I was reading about that movement and how, again, it's Islamic, so quite different than Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses. But people who go to their compound and stuff for training and all of that, they only get like 3 hours of sleep per night. They're given 2 hours per day to take care of other personal needs and all of that, and then the whole rest of the day, every single day, has to be devoted to the movement and furthering this. A very important movement for people to know about. Again, that's Gulen, the Gulen movement here in America, and this is quite similar to a degree when you think about, as you talked about, Mormons and having their time each day tightly controlled. And you see the Mormons on the bikes, but yes, they're given the freedom to go out and go to homes and all that kind of stuff. But, if they're not on the clock, they are, like you said, tightly controlled by the people who they're staying with, living with, and all of that. If they even get a hint that they're straying in any way, sometimes they'll split them up and send them to a completely different city where all of a sudden they have another new person. They don't know anybody else. So these are all factors that people need to be aware of. And there's a peer pressure that's there as well. And that's what this kind of sounds like, the things that you're talking about, like a severe form of peer pressure. Is that accurate to call it that, or should we call it something else?
That's fairly accurate. It is a severe form of peer pressure, just in that that's how they get you to start changing your behavior. In psychology, we call it cognitive dissonance theory. It's when your behavior doesn't match your thoughts, and so you try to rationalize your behavior in order for your thoughts and emotions to change to match that behavior. If you want to study cognitive dissonance on a basic level, go to any high school cafeteria and watch how the different cliques form, and how individuals, you may have children yourself that came home one day, had suddenly started speaking differently or dressing differently, and it's their ability to try to fit in with a group that they have found to be confident or is fulfilling some aspect of their personality, and so they start to match that leader. When we get to destructive cult groups, that cognitive dissonance is what is focused on by the group. So what they want to do is make sure that if they control your behavior, then automatically they know that your brain will do the work of rationalizing your thoughts and emotions for them in order to make your behavior justify the ends. So if you're looking at your own group and it's always the ends justify the means, you may very well be in a destructive cult group. It's extremely important. I'm reminded of a flying saucer cult in the late 1950s, early 60s in Wisconsin, and a bunch of followers went out to follow this woman who was supposed to be a prophet, but she had determined that the group was going to get saved by these flying saucers and that the world was going to be overtaken by another great flood. Well, the day came, they went out to the hillside to get picked up by the flying saucers. Nothing happened, and she disappeared. But as we did work on documenting the kind of the exit strategies of these group members, instead of being humiliated, which is what you would think would occur, they instead started rationalizing that Well, really, what had happened was that their work with this group had pleased God to such a high degree that he had decided to stay the flood, and they continued to stay in the group in spite of the failed prophecy. So it's this
Wow.
is the type of thing that we're talking about when we talk about cognitive dissonance, and this is the type of thing, this natural phenomenon is what is being manipulated in these destructive groups.
Now, what conditions are necessary for thought control to be destructive to a person?
Deceptive practices. It's seen in every single one of the groups. You want to monitor information and how information is shared with adherents. So, anytime you have a significant theological doctrine that's being altered over time, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses have their New World Translation where they've actually physically altered the New Testament in order to match their teachings. And then when they show up to your door, they tend to say, well, just hold on with your Bible. If you have your Bible out, we'll use our Bible. It's more accurate. Same thing with the Book of Mormon, for example. It's been changed over 3,900 times since the initial Book of Mormon in 1830. And the fact that that information is withheld from adherents, that's a really, really, really important factor. Secondarily, authoritarian leadership. There's always kind of a top down political type structure where the very top is not to be questioned. So we have presidents in some cult groups. We have the governing body and the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, that receive revelation directly from God and pass it on to the rest of the adherents, and you aren't to question it until it fails to come to pass, and then you are to determine that it's really just because it's new light or the light is getting brighter over time. Controlled emotional intellectual content, we've talked about that before. This is controlled time. So with the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, their time cards over the course of their day, how many houses they visit, who they visited with, how many pamphlets they handed out. They're not given time to ever reflect or deconstruct their day or think through, okay, was any of this contradictory? Was any of this inconsistent? And then, of course, that exclusivity and isolation, like with the group that you mentioned in Islam, you can have physical compounds where people go to study. Or with the Moonies, for example, in the 1980s, you would actually go on retreat, and it'd be the same sort of thing. There'd be a reduction in your meals, high sugar content, very, very, very low level sleeping hours. So you'd actually woken up in the middle of the night so that you were sleep deprived as long as possible. Think about the fundamental LDS churches with their compounds so that they can practice what they want without being monitored. These are the types of things that are required in order for these destructive thought control groups to do as much damage as they can do.
And this is something that we see when we look to Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, which are definitely the prominent groups here in the West that people are aware of. Those are the groups who you see all the time. You see the Jehovah's Witnesses walking down the street. You see the Mormons riding their bikes. And of course, they're both going to a place, it's not a church, each week to have a debrief and kind of a powwow with the other people who are part of that group as well. And these are both works-based religions. They both teach salvation by works, which we don't find in the Bible either. So they have wrong theology, they have wrong doctrine, they have books outside of the Bible to back up their false teachings because you can't find those teachings accurately interpreted in the Bible itself. And again, it's not just interpretation, it's what the author meant when he wrote it. It's usually a huge difference there between authorial intent and reader response. When a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon reads just the Bible itself and then tries to interpret that. Very interesting information, though, for people to be aware of. What aspects of normal life are altered when someone is experiencing this type of slavery, whether it's one of these two groups or any of the other ones that you mentioned?
For individuals who are experiencing this type of thing, what they would look like from the outside is we hear them described as individuals who are acting in a play. It's as though they have an alternative reality that they are living out in front of you. And so, even when you're trying to connect with them or trying to speak with them about things that have happened in the past, even loved ones, that family members, people you know really, really well, suddenly it's they put on this new identity, and that identity is extremely tied to this new group or belief
Mm.
system. They usually abandon their previous lifestyle, which is usually why you don't hear from them for a while. Some of the groups that went out in the 70s, for example, like you think about Jonestown and heading to Guyana physically, and then the family members were never hearing from their loved ones. You hear, and Heaven's Gate, that's the other one that's a really big one, that they stopped responding to their family. Um, there's also a teaching that is very, very, very common, especially here in the West, and that is to assert that their group is the only group that is righteous, or their group is the only group that is spiritual, and all the other options, all the other denominations of Christianity out there are false. So think about Joseph Smith's testimony when he first, you look at the introduction of the Book of Mormon, he was praying about which denomination to join, and the revelation that he received was they're all bad. None of them are righteous, and what you are about to receive is the only thing that is righteous. Um, Finally, a loading of the language. That is when you have a group that is using terminology that is fairly prominent in the culture in which it exists. So here in the United States, it would be biblical terminology, but they've redefined those terms. So when we talk about grace in the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses understand that to be more like a coin that you stick in your back pocket, like cab fare, that gets you halfway there, but you have to get yourself the rest of the way. Whereas we know in Orthodox Christianity that grace is the free gift of God, and it's the work of Jesus Christ alone, and there's nothing that you could do to earn that, let alone join a group that requires your complete and total attention and finances and all of your time. So it's these sorts of aspects that are altered in the lives of individuals who are joining these destructive groups that you need to be watching out for.
And Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism is just two of the flavors of a lie that is out there. Satan isn't very creative. It's just different flavors of distractions from the truth of the Bible, of the true Jesus Christ. And it's very important for people to understand that, yes, you will use Jesus, God, the Bible, and all these different terms with these groups, and they use those terms too. So unless you ask them, what do you mean by that? Or who is this person to you? What do you believe about God, about Jesus? If you never define your terms, you're going to continue to talk past one another, and it just leads to ongoing confusion on both sides. So we need to be educated as Christians about not only what Christianity teaches, but about what other people believe and why they believe it, and be able to defend the historic Christian faith as we share the gospel with them as well. Now, do you have any advice for our viewers who may know someone who was actually suffering from this type of mind enslavement?
The trauma that's experienced by loved ones who lose family members to these groups, friends, those individuals, please know that there is always hope. There's no group that is so completely gone from you that cannot be helped. Also know that real love is unconditional. Think about Jesus Christ's love for us. That love is always more powerful than the conditional love that they're experiencing in the group that they're with. So even though they feel very distant from you and you feel like they are completely lost and you cannot get to them, know that Jesus Christ always can. Also know that there are people like me who are out there to help you. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Understand that if you yourself have been in one of these groups and gotten out, or somebody's helped you to get out, please tell your story, because those stories are so unbelievably powerful for the individuals who are still in these groups, to hear that outside of this group that's claiming that they're the only way, that they're the only truth, that they're the only way that they're going to be saved, to see that somebody has gone out and nothing has happened to them that's negative, and that they've come to understand the power of Jesus Christ and his real gospel, that itself can be unbelievably powerful in helping facilitate the exits of these individuals from these horrific groups.
And that's so important that we focus on giving these people hope outside of their organization, which at this point they may not realize that they are trapped into. But if we as Christians are rude and everything to them, in our hope, mixed with that is that they become a Christian, well, they're going to be thinking, well, I don't like you. Why would I want to become like you? We need to be Christ-like when we reach out to the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. If you don't have time to talk, well, then just don't answer your door, but don't open the door and then be rude to them. They need hope outside of the Watchtower, outside of the Mormon Church. And of course, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are leaving those groups all the time because they're hearing the gospel from Christians. And of course, the Father's drawing people to his Son, which of course no one can come to the Son unless the Father draws him. And we are God's instrument to go out and share the true gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ with everyone. And that includes Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, etc. So something that you touched on there, Anna, is something I wanted to ask you, is that we do have viewers out there, I'm sure, who want more information and help to reach a loved one who is experiencing what we discussed here in this episode. Where should they go for help?
Go and talk to your local Ratio Christi apologist first. They're usually your first line defense. They've been trained. They've been cleared in Orthodox Christianity. So at the very least, if you don't know what you're dealing with, you have a standard by which you can judge whether or not the group is in self-Christian or if it's destructive. Past that, they'll know who to put you in touch with, even if it's just me as a first tier. Secondarily, there's the International Cultic Studies Association, which is a global society of members of clinicians, psychologists, cult apologists like myself, who are trained in this material. We are there to help. We are there to help you figure out exactly what you're dealing with, get your loved one out, and hopefully deal with the fallout and the consequences of having to counsel and exit counsel these individuals who are going through these things. Finally, educate yourself. Steve Hassan's books are out there. They're fantastic. He's the world's leading cult apologist. He's not a Christian, but he is someone who has studied this for years and years and years, and has tons of experience and can help very, very much. Finally, just be aware. Leah Remini, for example, her show on A&E is fantastic, talking about Scientology and exposing it for what it is. Be on the lookout for people who are exposing these groups, who are teaching what is actually going on, and listen to them, support them, and reach out to them to encourage them to continue to do so, because it takes a lot of bravery sometimes to stand up to such major groups like the Scientologists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Folks, as you have heard and as you can see on the bottom of your screen, Anna is Ratio Christi's cult and new religion specialist. So feel free to go to that link to see more or find more information about her. And also there's a contact button there to reach her as well if you have any more questions about what you heard in this episode. Anna, it's always a blessing to have you here and to share about the different topics that we talk about. So thank you so much for being back on Ratio Christi's Truth Matters.
Absolutely, Tony, anytime.
Friends, when we look at the available evidence, we find that the Christian worldview aligns with reality. We need to think about our need for a Savior, and salvation is found only in the Lord Jesus Christ. Please check out our website, ratiochristi.org, to be able to find out more, and you can see a world map of where we currently have chapters, where we do have Ratio Christi chapter directors, specialists in apologetics, defending the Christian faith, and they are the ones to go to for more information. Please pray for this ministry and support it financially. That will allow this vital work to continue. Remember, when it comes to what we believe and why we believe it, truth matters.